Good evening and Happy New Year to all of you, and welcome to Agriculture 194R, Focus on Agriculture. I am Jack Fujii and I'll be the instructor for Agriculture 194 this coming spring semester. Focus on Agriculture is a one-credit course offered by the College of Agriculture, Forestry, and Natural Resource Management at the University of Hawaii at Hilo. And we come to you live every Thursday evening from the television studios located at the Mookini Library on the University of Hawaii at Hilo campus. And this evening we're also coming to you live from the television studios on the Manoa campus at Kuykendall Hall on the second floor. So we also come to you by way of HITS, or the Hawaii Interactive Television System, and your local community service channel. This evening we're going to talk about the evolution, geology, and geography of the Hawaiian Islands. So we hope that you don't change the channel and stay with us. The objective of Agriculture 194R is to inform you about the various aspects of diversified agriculture, and every semester we focus on a different subject area. This semester we're focusing on the natural resources and conservation biology in Hawaii, which reflects the name of our new college from the College of Agriculture to the College of Agriculture, Forestry, and Natural Resource Management here at the University of Hawaii at Hilo campus. Before we go on, I'd like to make a few announcements. First of all, I'd like to cover the course requirements, and if I may have the Elmo, please. The course requirement is that you have to write lecture notes for each session. There are 16 sessions in total. I'd appreciate it if you would write all your lecture notes in a notebook and label each session properly so that I can identify each session. And at the end of the semester, mail in your notebooks no later than Thursday, May 13th. So I'd like to have all your lecture notes in my office by Thursday, May 13th. And I would appreciate it if you would mail in your original lecture notes. You don't have to copy or type your lecture notes. You can handwrite them and just send them in to me, and I will return your lecture notes via the U.S. mail. Okay, so in terms of the grading procedure, this is a no-stress course. We want you to get to know something about Hawaii's natural resources and conservation biology in Hawaii. So the grading method is the number of lecture notes that you turn in at the end of the semester. If you turn in anywhere from 15 to 16 lecture notes, you will receive an A. 13 to 14, you'll receive a B. 11 to 12, a C. And I hope no one turns in 9 to 10, which is a D. And of course, anything less than 8, forget it. Don't take the course, okay? And I'd also like to mention that we have over 40 DOE school teachers taking the course in the comfort of their living room. And if there's still time to register for the course, that is for the school teachers, the registrar gave me a deadline of January 22nd. So if you'd like an application form in the course syllabus, please write to me, Jack Fujii at the College of Agriculture, Forestry, and Natural Resource Management, or CAFNARM, University of Hawaii at Hilo, 200 West Kauili Street, Hilo, Hawaii, 96720-4091. You can also phone me at 974-7393, or you can fax me at 974-7674. And those of you on the internet, you can email me at jfujii@hawaii.edu. And whenever you have any questions regarding the class, please email me. I check my email every day. So if you have any questions, email me and I'll answer them as soon as possible. Another announcement for those of you taking the course in Honolulu, Next Thursday, the channel will be changed from, I believe, channel 55 to channel 56. So make sure you note that down. That's in Honolulu. It'll be channel 56. And of course, those of you on Kauai, you can watch us on channel 10. And on Maui, on the Maui CCTV. And here on the Big Island, channel 4, I believe, in East Hawaii, and channel 13 on West Hawaii. Since we are coming to you live this evening at approximately 8 p.m., we'll open the class up to questions and answers, and we will have phone numbers, and they'll be on the screen. And those of you who are watching us on television, of course, those of you on the Big Island can call us direct, and we have one number where those of you on the outer island can call collect. So we hope that you will participate this evening and join us approximately at 8 o'clock when we will open up the class to questions for our guest speaker this evening. Again, as I indicated earlier, this evening we're going to talk about the evolution, geology, and geography of the Hawaiian Islands. We're going to tell you all about how the islands were formed, its geology and geography. And this evening, my guest is Dr. Hampton Carson. Dr. Carson is a professor of, emeritus professor of genetics, and he's done a lot of work in the area of genetics, especially with speciation of the native Drosophila flies in Hawaii. And he's been with the Hawaiian Evolutionary Biology Program at the University of Hawaii for the past, I believe, 30 years. I think I've known Hamp for quite some time, and I'm glad that Dr. Carson will be able to join us this evening. So at this time, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Carson. So Hamp, why don't you go ahead?
Ladies and gentlemen, aloha to you. It's a great pleasure to come and talk to you this evening about the things that I'm very much interested in. Actually, my major research work over many years has centered on the genetics of Hawaiian animals and plants. Particularly, I'm interested in their history and their nature and the way in which they change as they go from one island to the next. What I'm going to do this evening is to really talk mostly about the geology and geography of the islands, and I'm talking pretty much as an amateur in that. I am very interested in the natural history area, and everything that has to do with the natural history area is part of my field. But I'm not a professional geologist, and those of you out there who find that I might have made some mistakes in my explanation of the geology, will you please let me know about it, or let Jack Fujii know about it. So what I'm going to do this evening then is to introduce some very interesting new geological data which have come to light here in the last 20 or 30 years, and which has changed very seriously our view not only of the planet Earth, but also indeed of the nature of the Hawaiian Islands and how they were formed. So I'd like to begin right away with some maps, and I have put up on here a map of the world, which perhaps it's not awfully clear to you here, but you can see in this area, you can see the Asian continent here, Bering Strait up here, North America and South America, and this centerpiece here is the entire Pacific Basin, which is, of course, an enormous area in the world. And usually we grow up with maps, at least I grew up with maps, which always centered on the Atlantic Ocean. What they show you is, you know, Paris and London on one side and New York on the other, and then California's out at the edge somewhere. Then they split the map between the right down the middle of the Pacific Ocean, so you can't really appreciate where Hawaii is. In this case, Hawaii is 2,000 miles, you see, from the North American continent, 4,000 miles across here to the Asian continent, and way far away down south here to Australia. Hawaii is the most isolated archipelago in the world. Of course, one of the best ways to see what the, I'm going to look at the globe over here now, if you can put the camera on the globe. It's always much better to deal with a globe. And here are the islands right in the middle of the globe, and there you see is North America over there, and you spin the globe a little bit, you see how enormous that thing is. And that doesn't show on the flat maps. Here's China and Japan over here. And swinging back this way, we get to the Atlantic Ocean, you see, which is very much smaller than the Pacific Ocean. So we are uniquely situated in the world as far as the isolation is concerned. And it turns out when we deal with animals and plants, the isolation is a very important item which we have to take into account. The next slide shows a slightly clearer view, I think, on the monitor, at least it's clearer to me, where Hawaii is located near these four great continents, not near to it, but far away from them. And these arrows here show the approximate areas from which the various birds in Hawaii came. And actually, they come from four different continental land masses. And then these other arrows show that the plants, too, have come from all these different directions. So what we have is something which does not resemble any particular continent in its flora and fauna. They have come from all over, and their ecosystems in which they are formed are sort of integrated, plants and animals integrated, coming from all these different directions. Now, I would like to then take the next slide, please. Here, I can handle it here. Thank you. Here is a more detailed map of the Hawaiian archipelago, which shows some features which I think are very important. Here's North America in this inset, and here is a long ridge, the Hawaiian Ridge here, and the Emperor Ridge here. The Hawaiian Islands, as we know them, occupy just this very extreme southeastern portion of this map. The reason there is so much material showing in the picture is that this map is a contour map showing the depths of the ocean down to about a mile and a mile and a half. There are two contours there. As we all know, the islands which we're familiar with are here and are quite high islands. Kauai is a high island. But as you move from Kauai to the northwest, the islands get smaller and smaller. Necker and Nihoa and French Frigate Shoals and finally Midway Island, somewhere out about here. They do have, however, at their base, enormous volcanoes which come up from the floor of the ocean. That's why there's so much shown on the map here, is because a lot of it's under the ocean. Furthermore, that continues on until you get all the way out here to this point where the Hawaiian Ridge seems to end or to bend and go northward. This is very important from the geological point of view at this particular point. Now from here on, or from Midway on, there are no islands, nothing is above water, of water. Everything is submerged. And that is true when you go past the bend and all the way out here, coming almost to Kamchatka Peninsula. You see, here's Kamchatka Peninsula, and here are the Aleutian Islands, and this ridge of seamounts, as they're sometimes called, extend all the way up to this point here. Now these, in this position, are called the Emperor Seamounts, and I always wondered what that meant. It meant that they were discovered by Japanese scientists who decided they would name them these seamounts after their various emperors. So in the Daikakuji seamount at this point is the beginning of the Emperor chain, and the Emperor chain goes all the way up here to the Meiji seamount up here. And we'll come back to that, to this point a little bit further. But think of the distances here now. This is about 2,000 miles out here to Midway, almost. A little bit beyond it. To the bend, it's about 2,000 miles. That's about as far as from Hawaii to California. You can see that distance is about that. And then you have another 2,000 miles or so up here. In other words, this is a very long and very high ridge sitting on the floor of the ocean. And we have to now see what can be made in modern terms of this remarkable feature. Now, what I'm talking about here, of course, are oceanic islands. Oceanic islands are islands which are thrown up in the vastness of one of the Earth's oceans, and I have a map which displays the ocean in a quite different way. Now, I'll not point to this for a moment because I'd like you to see clearly some of the details. What this map is a map of the Pacific which embodies many of the new features which have now become available, mostly the features of the ocean floor. It's as if all the water were taken out of the Pacific Ocean and you're looking down on the floor of the ocean. Now, it is important to know that at the present time we no longer believe that the continents, such as the North American continent seen there, or Australia, are in fixed positions. It turns out, by a series of remarkable studies of the continents and of the movement of the continents, that they are actually in motion. Many of them are in motion, and furthermore, we'd like to go back to that slide again, if possible, and I'll point to it now. This particular area in here is occupied by what is called the Pacific Plate. There are about 8 major plates in the world. The Asian plate, the Australian plate, North and South American plate, and the Pacific plate, and we're going to concentrate on the Pacific plate. Also, you can see, if you look carefully, you can see the Hawaiian Ridge and the Emperor Ridge here as a very prominent feature in this particular area. Now, the plates, of course, are of different thickness in different parts of the world. The Pacific plate is not particularly thick, but what is most important is that the Pacific plate is in a process of moving. And it appears that it has been in a process of moving, and it moves in a direction from the east down here, the southeast down here, moving in a northwesterly direction, from southeast to northwest. In fact, the line of the Hawaiian Islands exactly parallels the present movement of this plate. Now, what causes this plate to move? How in the world can it possibly move and move? It moves extremely slowly, only about 3.5 inches a year. It's a very, very slow motion. The Pacific plate is moved by a geological activity in this area down in here, which is called the East Pacific Rise. And what the geologists have discovered down here is that hot lava from the mantle of the Earth, just well below the crust of the Earth, is welling up and oozing up onto the surface of the plate and is adding to the plate in this direction. Now, as all of these plates rest upon a molten mantle, that is, the mantle is plastic and molten. It would be like jelly-like material on which the hard plates are resting. And this East Pacific Rise is an area, a very long crack. You see, it's a huge crack, which is adding to the plate, so that the plate moves, and it moves in that northwesterly direction. What it does, however, is something very serious. When it hits these other plates up here, like the Asian plate, or Alaska is on a semi-plate by itself, and also along Japan here, it tends to slide underneath. It slides underneath the other plate, all along the western edge and the northwestern edge, so that causes severe earthquakes and volcanism throughout the whole of Japan, as we know, and part of China there is very unstable geologically. Also, it's very unstable here. These dark areas here are the trenches in which that plate is subducting. The technical term is that it subducts it underneath the more or less slightly less moving plate. That is, this is stationary. No plate is absolutely stationary, but that one up here takes a great deal of subduction. Furthermore, you'll notice that California is involved here because this East Pacific rise comes right up here to Baja California. See, it's pointing right at Baja California. Indeed, within Baja California, there's something called the San Andreas Fault. Takes its origin there and runs right up through California to this point, approximately. And the curious and interesting thing about this is that gives California its very unstable conditions too, but it's slightly different because the edge of the plate it just slides along the North American continent and does not subduct underneath it. It subducts up here in Alaska, but not along here. And another curious fact is that the city of Los Angeles sits on the Pacific plate, which makes them, as we do here in Hawaii, that makes them sort of akin to us. But San Francisco, I'm sorry to say, is standing on the North American plate. It's not really a Pacific entity. And as the plate is moving all the time, it is often said that the city of, by the geologists who like to joke about this, I don't know quite why, but anyway, that the city of Los Angeles is moving northward towards the city of San Francisco. So there are plenty of volcanic problems here. And now let me bring up, well, I have this map on here. This is an important point. I want to bring up the subject of hot spots. Now, this spot down here is fairly hot in that there's lava coming up, but it's not coming up only from the mantle of the Earth. But when you go down deep below the mantle of the Earth, down into the core of the planet, there is a hot lava, extremely hot lava there, which occasionally makes its way through and melts through the plates. And one of the major features of the Pacific area is the Pacific Hot Spot, or the Hawaiian Hot Spot, if you will, please, which is right here, just right underneath Kilauea volcano and Mauna Loa volcano at the present time. Furthermore, it is the really major hot spot, and it is in fixed, it is a more or less fixed, no, actually fixed position. Most of the continents will move, but the hot spots, there are only relatively small number of them around the world, and I won't talk about the others. We're mainly interested in the Hawaiian hotspot. They are fixed in position, and the geologists tell me that they are fixed in position because they're actually following the Earth's, fixed relative to the Earth's spin axis. Well, I don't know what that means exactly, and if some geologists want to explain that, that's fine, but don't ask me to explain what a spin axis is. But it's very important to know that although this Pacific plate is moving, the hot spot is remaining stationary, and that has a very important implications for the islands. Now, I want to take you now to the Elmo. If we can have the Elmo on, please. I'm going to give you a little model here of how the islands are formed. In this model, we have the air up here, and here's the surface of the ocean, and here is the crust of the Pacific plate, which is movable. It's sliding on this plastic mantle down here. This is the plastic mantle of the Earth, which is molten but not very thick. I mean, it is very thick, but the plate can slide across that. And now here is the Hawaiian hot spot shown in this picture right at this position here. And this is leads up from deep in the Earth. That is actually almost 80 miles down to the center of the Earth. And this hot spot is a kind of a channel which is in that fixed position. That's 19 degrees north and 155.5 degrees west is that position. Now, if you can imagine, this is the way the islands were formed according to a new theory which was proposed only in 1963 by J. Tuzo Wilson of Canada, a very famous Canadian geologist. In view of all we knew at that time, we were just learning about the movement of the plates and so on, he has suggested that the islands were formed in succession, one after another, as the plate moves over the hot spot. So that we can model that here. What I'll do now is to say that suppose the island of Kauai is about to be formed, you will suddenly get lava coming from this hot spot. It'll come out and break through the plate of the floor of the plate. Now this is a tremendously powerful material, of course, and it will come all the way up the ocean. And of course, none of this is in actual proportion. And up here, it will form an island. And in the case of Kauai, there was a single island like that, could be formed in that position. But as that plate is moving, and it's moving very, very slowly, we know that right now the plate is moving 3.5 inches a year, and so it is moving very slowly, so that suppose after a couple of million years, this would be 5.1 million years, let's say, maybe the hot spot sort of died down a little bit, or maybe went out into here and did other things, but couldn't find its way through the crust. And then later on, at about 2.5 million years ago, you have another eruption like this, which will give you another island, which of course is going to be Oahu, and there would be first the Waianae range, and then as it moves a little more, you would get the Koalau range, which those two are of different ages. The Waianae is older. This is 2.5 million years for the general Oahu situation, and then on it goes. We could go on here and form Molokai, you see, as a plate over that. This is the Wilson theory, and finally you get down over here to the Big Island, which is the most recent and is presumably right now sitting on top of the hot spot. These others have moved away. That means they are older islands, and they were formed, however, on the hot spot. Now, when you think back to that, that's enough for the Elmo at the moment. When you think back to the story which we had in the pictures earlier, you'll see that the islands are going to be different ages. And I have a slide which will show that. Next slide. Can I have that, please? We seem to have gotten that panel here, which came. Let me just explain from this island here. Here's the way the islands are at the present time. Here is the hot spot in its fixed position at this point. Here is the Big Island, the Maui complex here, and Oahu. 500,000 years ago, there was no Big Island. There was only Mahukona volcano. This has been determined by studying this particular area very carefully. That is a volcano which eventually disappeared below the surface. At 1 million years ago, we would have the Maui Nui, which is a large group of islands, all 3 islands together here with a hot spot under that. And going on back, Oahu, you see about 2.5, Kauai about 5. And it's important that I also point out this point here where this shows Necker, I think, or Nihoa. This is Nihoa here. And Necker is this fairly large island here. These are the leeward islands. So that we have this, this aging business. Now, how can we be sure about the ages of these things? There is very good independent evidence, which supports the Wilson theory. It has been really confirmed in many ways, and one of the most interesting ways is shown in the next slide, and I'm afraid this might not show up particularly well in our present our present projection system. But here we have the big island here. I'll just look at this roughly. And Midway Island out here. So this is the long view of the islands again. And what we have here is the ages are given of the islands based upon a study which of the conversion of potassium 40 to argon 40. So the so-called potassium-argon decay is used to date lavas because fresh lava has lots of potassium-40 in it as it comes up from that deep well under the ocean. And it solidifies, and when it solidifies, then the potassium starts to decay slowly to a gas, argon, to argon gas. And that argon gas can be measured. So when you have a piece of lava, you can give it to one of these scientists and say, how old is this piece? And he will analyze the ratio of potassium 40 to argon 40. And that will give you the age of the lava. Now, can I have that picture back again? They're shown here on this slide are the various ages of the lavas, which have been determined by a scientist from Australia, Ian McDougall. And I mention these people's names not because they're friends of mine or anything. It's just that it's important to know that these discoveries are really made by people working in laboratories. And I visited his lab in Canberra. It was just full of lava samples and all the years he studied that. And here is his data on the islands. Nothing more than 500,000 years at the Big Island. When you get to Maui, it's about 1 million years. When you get to out to Kauai, it's 5 million years, and on it goes out. Everything fits here out to 27 million years of age out here at Midway Island. Furthermore, they have studied the lava samples from way out in the Emperor Seamounts as well, because a lot of people didn't think that the Emperor Seamounts had very much to do with this particular story. But sure enough, the Emperor Seamounts are also successively older until you get out to the Meiji Seamount, way up north. It's about 80 million years of age, about 40 million years about halfway out along the seamounts. So what that tells us is that this is a very, very ancient feature of the Pacific Ocean, or the Pacific Basin, that these are the only volcanic activity in this entire chain is right there in Hilo, right under Hilo and right under Kilauea volcano at the present time. Furthermore, it suggests, you see, that this has been going on for a very, very long time. And the curious feature of the Emperor Seamounts being oriented north and south, as you probably noticed, is you can't see that here, but you get out here, you see it goes north in the seamounts. And that is probably because the movement of the Pacific Plate somewhere in around 40 million years ago stopped being directly north and changed into this southwest to southeast to northwest. Now the potassium-argon data are very, very convincing, of course. What is even very exciting and helps to confirm this hypothesis also, this theory, is that when we measure the rate of the movement of the plate, it is extraordinarily slow but extraordinarily steady, 3.5 inches a year. And you multiply this out and figure how long it takes it to go, or how long it would go in 100 years or 1,000 years or 1,000,000 years, you can figure out how long ago it was that Kauai was down over the hot spot. And you know, it's remarkable. It comes out to be 5.1 million years. It just sits right on top of the data of the potassium-argon dating. So these are very, very important things that, to know about Hawaii, because for one thing, Hawaii is going to be much older. Some parts of Hawaii are extremely old. That is, 5 million years is quite an old island. And the big island is still in the process of formation. And of course, just 18 miles off the coast of Kilauea volcano, there's Loihi volcano, 3,500 feet under the surface. It is coming along as the newest Hawaiian island. We don't know just when that's going to come up to the surface, but that has been going on for all these millions of years. The plate is moving away from it, and we on Oahu here are moving slowly all the time to the northwest. There are also some post-eruptional changes in each island. One of the most important kind of changes that you have is the very great increased weight of the newly formed islands as they sit on the Pacific plate. See, the Pacific plate is kind of fairly thin until it gets all this new lava from the ocean, from the Earth's core piled on top of it. That causes that to depress somewhat and to sink down. So the island tends to sink down as the more and more weight comes on it. There are also various other things which will affect the height of the island above sea level. We have, of course, in the past, we've had glaciers which tie up a great deal of the water and lower the sea levels down. There is, of course, such things as erosion. But one of the most exciting things, which have been very recently discovered, is shown in this next slide. And these are slumps and landslides which have fallen off the present islands. Now, as you see here, the green spots, of course, are our present islands. The big island here, just starting with it, there has been a big fall off from Kohala volcano, a thing called Palolo slump. There are also places here where it has fallen off. This is where Loihi is located. These have fallen off the big island, though. This particular slope of the big island is very unstable. And also from the Kona coast, enormous areas of debris there, which have been all sounded, soundings have been done, and it has been confirmed that all of these islands were very much larger in the past than they are right now. One of the most exciting ones is the Nu'uanu Pali. The Nu'uanu Pali is a feature, one of the almost unique features in the world in island biology, or island geology, because the Ko'olau volcano apparently broke in a very catastrophic loss of height all along that whole slope here, falling into the ocean and forming all of these things, along with a big fall also which came from Molokai in the past. And of course Kauai has had its times in the past. And this suggests, of course, that the islands were at one time very much higher and larger than they are at the present time. They're losing, it looks like they're losing heights. And if I can have the Elmo again, I have a little diagram or a table which will illustrate that point. What I'm showing here are the present and maximum heights of some of the Hawaiian volcanoes in feet. Now you see Mauna Kea, 13,796, is somewhat lower at present than it was at its maximum height, 15,091. So it has already lost some altitude, probably by landslides and crumblings and earthquakes from the summit down into lower elevations and possibly down into the ocean from Mauna Kea. Actually, I didn't put Mauna Loa on here because the height of Mauna Loa is exactly the same now as it ever was. It hasn't lost anything yet. In fact, its activity indicates that it may still be growing. But you see here, Haleakala volcano was at one time a very large volcano, 16,404 feet. So that's, that's 6,000 feet higher. That is going to give you very high altitudes and a possibility also of quite a different flora and fauna at the time when this island was extremely high, because for one thing, the rainfall coming from trade winds hitting the high slopes, hitting a high volcano will have a very different pattern than one which is only 10,000 feet. So Maui has probably changed quite a lot in that regard. The Ko'olau volcano here, you see, is also about 3,000 feet higher in the past. That is because of these slumps which we discussed. And Kauai also is now 5,000, and it was around 8,500. And I put down here, it's a very interesting point, is that Necker is now only 276 feet above sea level. It is 10 million years old. It's twice as old as Kauai. Very old island. Very low now, only 276 feet. But you see, it was quite a high island at one time. 3,609 is what they have calculated it to be based upon the slumps that are there. So the islands have been in the past, especially these leeward islands, have been much, much larger and taller than they are now. I like to have, let's see, I did that slide, didn't I? See what we got next in the way of the slides. Let me take a look here. Yes, I wanted to show the possibility of a slump on the Big Island. What we're showing here is the Pu'ukapukapu in the national park. Kilauea volcano is just up here in the corner somewhere. And you'll see that very steep cliff of Kilauea volcano of the Pali here. That is probably where a slump came from. These polys like this are because they cracked and slipped and fell off into the ocean. And furthermore, you can see another crack forming here. These cracks are, geologists call them faults, and the faults are extending along here. So it is possibly easy to predict that maybe this thing will eventually fall into the ocean here also in a major slump. And it is rather worrisome. The Kilauea crater has a fault running all the way down to Kapoho, and there is quite a bit of movement along that. And the geologists warn that one of these days it's likely that there'll be another slump from that particular area. Now, I would like to just turn off the slides for a moment and discuss briefly with you something about the biology. The biology of the islands is extremely important to biologists worldwide, because it's quite clear that these islands have formed in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, or very remote area in the Pacific Ocean, as bare lava flows coming up completely sterile from in the depths of the earth. So that anything which happens to be able to move out from one of the continents, and there apparently are no good nearby islands which could have supplied anything to such an thing. There is some controversy about that. But we have to look to the continents for the possible origin of some of the life on the new island that comes up. It is probable that some of the life, now I'll point out why in a moment, came into an island north of Kauai. Kauai is, of course, the largest island now that has a great deal of interesting fauna and flora. But as we study them genetically, and as we measure the genetic distance between the different forms, we find that some of them are indeed older than 5 million years. They have evolved apart amounting to about 5 million years or 10 million years distance genetically, which means that they must have come in on an island, on one of the leeward islands, when that was a high island. And that has changed the the views we have of Hawaiian biology very, very profoundly, because these islands did not evolve in situ or erupt in situ, but have moved away, and but nevertheless they start out with this completely bare lava, devoid of life, and this has piqued the interest of many biologists and scientists, and it recalls a quote which I'd like to make from Darwin's Voyage of the Beagle, written 150 years ago, when he visited the Galapagos Islands. He looked at them from offshore, from the ship, and he made the following statement, and it's something which I think of every time I see, we'll say, the big island as viewed from offshore. "Seeing every height crowned with its crater," he wrote, "and the boundaries of most of the lava streams still distinct, we are led to believe that within a period geologically recent, the unbroken ocean was here spread out. Both in space and time, we seem to be brought somewhat near to that great fact, that mystery of mysteries, the first appearance of new beings on this earth." Well, now on the islands we've been talking about, we're not going to see the new life arise just in front of us like that. What we're going to see is a colonist arriving there, and then staying there, being able to multiply itself and to live there, perhaps first on bare lava, and then perhaps some trees of some sort will come in and you'll get a sort of an ecosystem. And then when the next island comes up, following the first island that was colonized, there's a possibility of colonization from the older island down to the newer island. So that now we have to think in terms not so much of the arrival of these things from the continent at the present time, even though we have many animals and plants arriving in the islands unwanted at the present time. Another remarkable thing about the islands, the biology of the islands, is that from each island tends to have its own endemic species. For instance, I have worked with some Drosophila flies, very interesting flies, and if I have time, I'm going to show you pictures of a few of those. But we find we can count the number of species on Kauai. It's about 19 of these big species which we work with, very spectacular big flies, almost like butterflies. They're beautiful things. We can work with those. When we go to Oahu, there's something like 30 or 40 of this same lineage of flies, the same general kind of flies, but they're all different species, new species, but they show relationships to the Kauai ones. That's what we call single island endemism, or native to a single island. So Kauai has a lot of single island endemics. Oahu has a lot of single island endemics. When you go down to Kauai again, to Maui, again you have a whole set of new species there, and the Big Island too. It's as if evolution starts over again each time one of these islands comes up. And this is part of the reason why I'm particularly excited about working in the Big Island, because the Big Island is the newest place where life has been experimenting with colonizing and living. So there are a lot of questions, you see. Each animal or plant which we lay our hands on or look at or go up in the forest and find, we'd like to know where it came from. That's the first question. Where did this thing come from? You go up in Kauai in the rainforest, you'll find a huge plant called, by the Hawaiians, ape. It belongs to the genus Gunnera. It's a thing has a big stem on it this big around. It looks like a big umbrella, and you can carry it around, keep the rain off you, and so on. And I remember when I first saw this thing was when I was traveling in Costa Rica. Back in 1956, we found the same plant, Gunnera, same family of plants, same genus of plants, not the same species, they're in Costa Rica on the continental mainland. So that we have some clue where it came from, but you have to know. You find gunner, I remember recognizing that it's the same, but how in the world did it get from Costa Rica out here into the middle of the Pacific Ocean? And it, like the islands, and you find it in the rainforests at different elevations as you go down through in the Waianaes. There's a few places where it's present, also in Maui and down on the Big Island. So when did it arrive? Can we identify what the ancestor is? Well, we have some idea with the case of Gunnera, but a lot of the other things you really have to, the biologist has to go scurrying around looking for places to locate things which resemble the Hawaiian things. Now, of course, we have a series of ecosystems, and you will hear about this from some of the other speakers. I have a few slides here which will remind us that there are many, can I have the next slide, please? Many different ecosystems. This I had shown you. This shows the evolution of the Big Island. Remember, I showed it about 500,000 years ago with just Mahu Kona. This is to come, you see. And then 400,000 years ago, the Moore and Clegg, who did this work, found the old shorelines of these ancient islands. Kohala volcano more or less overcame the Mahu Kona volcano, and the Mauna Kea came up here, and here's old shoreline is with two new volcanoes, Hualalai and then Mauna Loa coming in, and Kilauea, of course, at the latest, and this is the way it looks today. So here are lava flows on the Big Island. These are new lava flows in the last 100 years mapped out, and this is the South Point area. This is up here in Hualalai. Now, we see here a plume of lava. Is that an ecosystem? No, it's not. But you know that lava, that picture was taken at Kilauea volcano. When that lava flows down the hill and solidifies, it is amazing how soon an ecosystem starts to develop on that. Really amazing. It was Dr. Frank Haworth of the Bishop Museum who found that almost as soon as the lava is cooling, it's still smoking away. It is a small cricket, which he was able to recognize as a new species, was moving out from the forest in which it was living, moving out and feeding on insects which were being blown out across that bare lava flow, which is still hot, still warm, and dying out there. And these insects were out eating that as part of their life. Furthermore, even at high altitudes, this happens. He discovered, and you may hear this from some of the other people. I'm just giving a few of the highlights here, the things which fascinate me. He found another bug, the Wekio bug, which is found at very high altitudes on Mauna Kea, just near the observatories, up in that completely desolate area. You wouldn't think anything could live up there. But again, insects are blown up from the lower elevations and catch in portions of the lava, and these Wekio bugs are living out there. They have their offspring, and the whole thing evolved up there for this particular ecosystem. So we have alpine ecosystems, and we have these other ones, and including, of course, also rainforest ecosystem. There's the alpine ecosystem. That would be where the Wekio bug is, because the Wekio bug can be snowed in. It's perfectly capable of withstanding cold weather. This slide I show only to emphasize that the ecosystem is very different where the trade winds come in close to the mountains here like this, but those mountains tend to cut off the trade winds, and you get much drier areas, you see here, and furthermore wetter areas again in the Waianae Range. The trade winds determine very different ecosystems, and that is true on all of the islands. And of course, there's the magnificent ecosystem of the rainforests. This is taken from at Waikamoe, Maui, and to explore and find animals and plants here is of very great interest. I'd like to take the Elmo once again and just briefly mention for you the animals and plant systems that we have in Hawaii. Now, what it says here is approximate numbers of species of native and alien land animals and plants. Of course, we have many aliens, things that come in with the airplanes and ships and which occupy the towns and cities and are pests in the rainforest and so on. Our question we like to have is, how are we going to recognize what's original to the Hawaiian chain and what is not? Now, I have here in mammals only one native mammal. That is a Hawaiian bat, which is, I can show in the next picture. The Hawaiian bat is, we have the Hawaiian bat coming up. Can we have slides? Yeah, there's the Hawaiian bat. This is very interesting because this has come in apparently fairly recently. It's very closely related, for example, to a wide-ranging bat of North America, North and South America, called the hoary bat. This one is recognized by some authorities as a separate species, as a new Hawaiian species. But going back to the Elmo again, mammals are not particularly exciting for us, if we can have the Elmo, because there's really only this one native species. Of course, you can count the monk seal if you like, but I've been emphasizing the terrestrial life because we have most information about the history of that, and you're going to hear mostly about terrestrial life in subsequent lectures. Land birds is a very exciting group. You have 38 species of native land birds, and 41 aliens. You see, the aliens have come in, and many of them take over and crowd out the land birds. And I'd like to have that slide of the birds. There's the monk seal, and here are the land birds. Now, this particular family, can we zoom that just a little bit? This is the family Drepanidae, this famous family of honey creepers, in which we have maybe 25 or so species are adapted for all kinds of different habitats in the islands, tending to be move around the islands to some extent, but often different species in different areas of the islands. And all of this developed uniquely here in Hawaii. So we have a kind of an evolution laboratory here just with the birds alone. And any one of them has a particular interesting story. They're often very, very rare, and some were only just discovered very recently. Go back once more to the Elmo, please. Another very big thing are the snails. 788 species, a huge fauna of snails. But unfortunately, these snails are very sensitive to the interference with the habitat. And when the forests are cut and pastures are made, in the highlands particularly, the snails have disappeared. Also, we have made some bad mistakes in introducing things which have injured the snails. For instance, remember they had this giant African snail was introduced by somebody, and thinking it might be good to eat or something. It became a pest almost immediately. Then, instead of trying to get rid of it in some other way, they tried to get a predaceous snail which would kill the giant African snail. They introduced that, and that escaped into the forests and has decimated these gorgeous, gorgeous little snails. We have a picture here of one snail. Can we have the next, please, of the slides? This beautiful catanella, even more beautiful than the Drosophila and the birds in the eyes of some people. Just to go back to the Elmo once more, and I'll show you what the main features are, and that is the insects and their kin. 7,800 species of insects and spiders and crustaceans living in the land areas of Hawaii. Absolutely amazing. That is why we have entomologists who just love to find a new insect and follow it out, its history. And the vascular plants also, 1,300 species of native vascular plants, and of course many, many introduced things, which again we have to go seeking them at higher altitudes. Now I do have a few more slides. Can you just run a few more slides to show pictures of some of our, let's see, I have them here. Yeah, here are a couple of our Hawaiian Drosophila flies, tapestry-like things. These are both endemic to the Big Island. They formed when the Big Island was formed. That's when these things developed from ancestors which can be identified on Maui by genetic means. We can show that they're both very closely related, they're both different, and they're both very closely related to a Maui fly, which is closely related to a Oahu fly, an older one probably, and then back to a Kauai species. Here's another one, don't they look nice? They're really very substantial insects. They just feed on plant juices and so forth, and they're not really dangerous or unpleasant flies at all. And still another one, these are from the Waianae range, male and female of species of another one. And I think that's all for the slides now. My friend Ken Kaneshiro will be here next week, and he will be discussing the insect story in a little more detail, picking out particular things for us to talk about. However, I do want to show one other very important plant, and that is the silver sword, the amazing silver sword, which evolved. This is a species that evolved just on Maui, and that has also very interesting relationships which go back through the other islands. Indeed, on the same island, this tree form here, that's a Dubautia tree. That is the same small group as the silver sword. You wouldn't recognize until you look at the flowers. Evolution has produced a tree out of that one. And here is another cushion plant growing right out on the lava. That is also a Dubautia, which is extremely closely related genetically to the silver sword. It's just that the genetic material of these things is got to be studied so we can try to understand how so many very interesting, fascinating things can evolve on the islands, and especially useful down at the Big Island, because I think there's a good possibility that things are already evolving down there. Well, now, Jack, if you're there in Hilo, that ends my presentation. I have more slides, but let's end it there, and we can go to you, and perhaps you can find out whether anybody has any questions to ask me. Are you there, Jack?
It's a really very interesting presentation. And for those of you who are just joining us for the first time, you're watching Agriculture 194R, Focus on Agriculture, which is a one-credit course offered by the College of Agriculture, Forestry, and Natural Resource Management here at the University of Hawaii at Hilo. And we are coming to you live not only from the UH Hilo studios, but also from the studio at the University of Hawaii at Manoa campus. And this evening we are featuring Dr. Carson, Emeritus Professor of Genetics at the University of Hawaii at Manoa Genetics Department. And his presentation this evening was the evolution, geology, and geography of the Hawaiian Islands. And we've come to that portion of the class where those of you in the viewing audience, and of course those of you here in the classroom, can ask questions of our guest speaker this evening, Dr. Hampton Carson. So if you have any questions, All you have to do in the classroom is press that button, and when you see that green light come on, just go release the button and then go ahead and ask your questions. So if you have any questions, please do that. And of course, those of you who are watching us on television this evening, we are coming to you live, so now's the time for you to call in any questions. The numbers are on the screen. The numbers are 974-7726 and 974-7727. Those are the numbers for the Big Island. And of course, those of you on Maui, Oahu, and Kauai, Molokai, and Lanai, if you're watching this, you can call us collect at 961-9046. So if you have any questions for Dr. Carson, and if you want to know anything about genetics of the animals' life in Hawaii, please give us a call. We have one caller, so will the first caller let us know where you're calling from, and go ahead with your question, please.
Yes, sir. I'm calling from Pahoa.
Uh-huh.
Sir, how come we don't have any bats in this island? Why don't they bring them in? Because we have durian tree, right? They don't fruit if we don't have bats, you know.
What animal again was that?
Bat. She was speaking of a bat.
Oh, the bats.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, we do
you know,
have...
I'm from Malaysia, Singapore, right?
Oh, I see.
And those
Okay.
fruits are very expensive. Like, we buy like, sometimes in the season I fly to Honolulu to buy like $30 one fruit.
That's
If
right.
we have that, we have a lot of Asian people here. We love those fruits.
We do have
without,
some...
without bats, we don't fruit, you see.
Yes,
we do have some durian fruit that's on the islands, and I was trying to get a plant for our sustainable agriculture plot here on...
I hang up and talk to you. I listen to you, okay?
Okay, fine, thank you. Well, Hamp, maybe you might tell us a little bit about what are the problems of introducing alien species to our islands. So, Hamp, maybe you might elaborate on that a little bit.
Yes, and it's a very interesting point, because I think a lot of people think that we can improve Hawaii by bringing all kinds of things in, and that was an idea which was present, about 100 years ago, and all kinds of things which are damaging, like the mongoose and so forth, have been brought into the islands and really very, very dangerous for the ecosystems of the islands. We would not know whether the fruit bats could maintain themselves here. In fact, it would probably be impossible for them to survive here, because there's not any fruit that they could feed on and so forth. And the same is true of introductions of deer and rabbits and all kinds of things which might escape and disturb our very delicate ecosystems. And one of our big thrusts is to try to conserve some of the native part of Hawaii. In Singapore, it's just entirely different kind of ecosystem there that the bats belong to. But in Hawaii, we have our own ecosystems, and we need to professionally manage those ecosystems, both on private conservation land and public conservation land, to make sure that we can preserve them and preserve the animals and plants in them native for Hawaii. And we can't make Hawaii into something different than what it is. So we have to be very careful not to introduce things like that.
Okay, I hope that answers a question from the caller from Pahoa on the Big Island. We do have another caller. Could you let us know where you're calling from and go ahead with the question, please?
Hi, I'm calling from Oahu.
Okay.
And I just had a question on the slide which explains the various heights of the mountain ranges.
Yes.
The present and the maximum. It's clear that the mountain ranges are highest on Mauna Kea and Haleakala as they come down, but then there seems to be, I'm confused as to why are the mountains on Oahu only 3,150 feet, where the ones on Kauai seem to be a little higher.
Okay, Hamp, can you answer that one?
Well, the point of that Elmo demonstration was that some of them have been very high. For instance, Haleakala on Maui was bigger and taller than either Mauna Kea or Mauna Loa at one time. And furthermore, the Ko'olau Range on Oahu was also very high, around 6,000 feet. I think that it's not clear that we've had such big mountains. When Oahu and Kauai were formed, I don't believe, well, they did not attain heights, anything like the major heights of Haleakala and Mauna Kea and Mauna Loa. This may be due to the fact that in those slightly more recent times, the hot spot has been feeding the lava through a somewhat thinner portion of the crust, and therefore you get much more lava flowing up on the surface than you did in the others. I don't believe that is really well known as exactly why, but that would be a reasonable suggestion, I think.
Does that answer the question from Oahu? I guess so. The caller hanged up. Hamp, the Big Island is quite large, so is the Big Island resting on that hot spot for a longer period than the other islands, or?
No, I don't think so. I think it's just the hot spot's been feeding the Big Island very efficiently ever since Haleakala was built. Did you know? In one of those slides I showed how Mahukona came up in the Alinu-Haha channel there, and then following that, right on top of that, Kohala, and then Mauna Kea. I mean, a continual, very, very great activity. The plate is moving, you know, moves away from those particular positions, and it's now, the plate is centered over, Kilauea is the place, and Kilauea and Mauna Loa are directly over that hot spot. And of course, Loihi, which is this new volcano offshore, is also part of the present system, so that it can feed 2 or 3 volcanoes simultaneously, but still the plate is moving, and you will probably not get any further activity in Mauna Kea or Kohala, or probably not Hualalai, because the hotspot appears to be the only place in the Hawaiian Emperor chain where major eruptions are occurring.
Okay, thank you very much, Hamp, for that answer. We do have another caller. Will the caller let us know where you're calling from, and go ahead with the question, please?
Dr. Fujii.
Yeah, Haruso Joe. Okay.
I have a question for Dr. Carson.
Okay.
You know, it's been many a times, I've always been confused about the word indigenous and endemic. He mentioned the fly, a certain fly been an endemic fly. And in botany, in one of the programs that come on TV from the other, your sister, what you call it, station in Honolulu, they mentioned that endemic is like the picture that he showed of the silver sword. And I also know, I've been playing around with this plant called a puakala. The puakala is also considered an endemic plant. And most of the other plants they call indigenous, and like the taro, that they call it an indigenous plant, you know. And I'm wondering at what point, to be consistent with all the different sciences that we have in maybe in botany, or like what Dr. Carson is doing and other things.
Okay.
Why don't they come out and say, when is a certain thing endemic, and at what point it becomes indigenous?
Okay. Hamp, maybe you can explain that terminology regarding alien species, endemic species, and indigenous species.
Yeah, an alien species, we'll start with that, is one which comes in or is brought in by man, or is brought in by human activity on shipboard or something like that. And we call that an alien species, or non-endemic. Now, an endemic species is one, I think best to look at it as one that evolved here. In other words, it is a species which is found only in Hawaii. You go elsewhere in the world, you do not find that species. And you find also relatives of that species. If there are more than one close relatives, that will indicate that maybe the whole group evolved in Hawaii. It's an endemic family or an endemic genus. And each person working with the organisms has to decide for himself. Now, an indigenous one is one which has become naturalized from elsewhere, and which has now become integrated into the ecosystem, but is still fairly ancient. So that the endemic species is the main focus of our interest. In most cases, in geographical botany and.
Okay.
But knowing that we have the system of genetic investigation, wouldn't it be kind of now today's science be able to tell whether some of the so-called indigenous plant may be in an endemic plant to Hawaii? You know, because a lot of the things that have been called indigenous could basically be an endemic plant, or
they
vice
might
versa.
be. You have to have enough data to know more than just about. Well, you take taro for example. Now, taro probably arrived in the canoes with the ancient Hawaiians early in what 600, 700 years ago, and that is of course necessary for that to be planted. So you don't take that as part of the native or endemic or indigenous fauna that is brought. It's really here by man. It's like rice or cotton or whatever, or ornamental plants or plumerias or whatever. They may actually, some of them, reproduce here, but they really would be not called indigenous because they're not part of a native original
How about human beings?
ecosystem.
How about human beings in various parts of the world? Can they ever be called endemic instead of indigenous?
That is possible, I guess, but they have moved so much that it's really not comparable. It's not really possible to use that kind of terminology with them. There possibly some New Guinea tribes might be considered endemic to the villages in which they have, but they of course came there from mainland, from Southeast Asia, and so that you have to look back to where they came from. No, you can't really do that anymore because I think that it's not useful to classify people in that way.
Okay, thank you, Doctor.
That's my notion anyway.
Thank you very much for calling Harusa Joe from Kailua on Oahu, and I thank you very much for your letters. I faxed one of your letters over to Dr. Z in regards to your ava leaf tea. We are coming to you live this evening, and this evening we're featuring Dr. Hampton Carson, and we're talking about the evolution, geology, and geography of the Hawaiian Islands. And if you have any questions, please give us a call. The numbers are on the screen. And I believe we have some questions from our classroom here. So our first student here, go ahead.
I was wondering about the progression of the Pacific Plate, that you'd said it's moving at about 3.5 inches per year. Is there any indication that that's been faster at some time or slower, or has it been a consistent movement?
The geologists tell us that it has been a consistent movement, and that is certainly suggested by the ages of the islands. That is, they just directly match the very slow movement, that slow movement over very long periods of time. Now, I think there is some sort of a shift there in the direction of movement that I mentioned, But actually that movement has been gradual, and it's apparently been going on for something like 80 years ago, 80 million years ago. You would have that Meiji seamount down over the hot spot. And it has reached the edge there, and maybe even older things than that may have already been subducted down underneath the Asiatic plate down into the molten areas in the core of the Earth. That is, the floor of the Pacific is moving, and many areas up there in the northern part, which were there when the islands first started coming, have disappeared long ago into the abyss. But it'll be a long time before the Big Island gets there, for example. It'll be 80 million years for the Big Island to get up there. But that's a very interesting question. I discussed this with Professor Clegg, who was a director of Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. He and I wrote a joint paper on this for a recent book in geographical botany, or geographical and evolutionary biology of Hawaii. And he told me that there is no indication that the plate is doing anything but moving very gradually, and that's true, of course. It's very important to go to the California people, geologists as well, because the slippage of the Pacific plate along the west coast is running at about the same rate. Well, it is the Pacific plate, so it's going the same rate there as it is here.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Hamp. We have another caller. Could you let us know where you're calling from and go ahead with the question, please?
Hello?
Hello, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm calling from Maui, Hawaii.
Okay.
My name is Jean-Michel.
Uh-huh.
My question is, we're approximately 8 minutes sunlight away from the sun. Does Dr. Carson have any evidence of drastic changes of evolution that have occurred here in the Hawaiian Change by his studies? And I'll hang up now and just listen.
Okay, Hamp?
Yes, we are able to measure the rates in some of the insects which we're studying, and they form new species. I understand that, I don't know about the distance from the sun, but the sun has been, shining on Hawaii all the time that the islands have been here. And of course, the animals and plants that get here are the ones which have to undergo the changes. And the rate of change is something which is remarkable. It's remarkably difficult to get good measures of rate of change or what you might call evolutionary change. It's one of the things that I'm particularly interested in. But
Okay.
we have some characteristics of some of the Big Island flies which we have been studying, and we've found really a quite striking change in the mating behavior between these insects from the volcano of Hualalai down towards Kilauea. That's the newest volcano. So that we do have the possibility of measuring the rates of change, rates of genetic change in living populations, and that's one of the things which we need to get more data on to find out just how fast it is. But we know that we have in these Drosophila, we have, I think, 25 Big Island species. All of them are unique to the Big Island. They are definitely different than the Maui relatives. You can trace them back to Maui relatives, but when they got to the Big Island, they underwent changes, and they have been doing that change in those within that 500,000 years.
Okay.
Whether that's enough information on that.
Hamp, yeah, I was really amazed. I thought, the poly over there on Oahu, I thought that was all due to wind erosion, but now I learned something about this slumping where the whole island just fell into the ocean, and that's what caused that great poly over there. I always thought that was a result of wind erosion.
Yes, that's what a lot of people thought, and Professor Moore and Clegg and their colleagues have made a very, very tight case, I think, for the slumpage, not only there but elsewhere. And it was something almost completely overlooked by the earlier geologists. It's interesting.
Okay, I'd just like to remind everyone that's watching, you can still register for Agriculture 194R. We have 15 additional sessions to go. We're just going on our first session this evening, and if I could have the Elmo, if you're interested in signing up for the course, please get a hold of me, and you can write to me at the CAFNARM, or the College of Agriculture, Forestry, and Natural Resource Management, University of Hawaii at Hilo, 200 West Kauili Street, Hilo, Hawaii, 96720-4091, or you can call me at 808-974-7393, or fax us at 808-974-7674. And of course, those of you on the internet, you can get a hold of me at jfujii@hawaii.edu. The internet is a real good way to get a hold of me, because if I'm not in, you can always give me an email, and I'll be sure to respond to your question or whatever question that you may have to ask me. Do we have another caller? I hear the phone ringing. Okay, we have another caller, so will the caller let us know where you're calling from and go ahead with the question? I think we have about 4 more minutes, so we'll have to make the question real fast.
Hello, Dr. Fujii.
Yes.
I understand you have a cookbook for sale from last semester. Can you tell me how to go about getting one?
Okay, well, since you mentioned that, last semester we had a cooking class, and yes, you can get a hold of the cookbook by either emailing me or writing me to the College of Agriculture, 200 West Kauili Street, Hilo, Hawaii, 96720-4091, or call us or email me. So you have that on the screen right now. So I'll just kind of leave that on the screen, and you can copy that down. Do we have any other questions real quick? We have another question? Okay, it'll have to be real quick. We have 3 more minutes. So please let us know where you're calling from and go ahead with the question, please. Hello, you're on the air.
Hello, am I on the air?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, this is Frank Sinensi. I'm calling from Hanamaui.
Okay.
I'm interested to know about ohia plants. Do they always originate on new lava flows? I know about the cricket thing, and that's very interesting.
Okay.
I wanted to direct this question to Dr. Ham there about the ohia plants.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I'll hang up and listen to the answer.
Thank you. Hamp, what about our ohia
That's a very
trees?
interesting question. Ohia, of course, seeds are dispersed by wind, and they grow from seed. The wind blows them out on these new lava flows, and they're one of the first things to germinate out there. Right in the bare lava they germinate, put the roots down. Pretty soon the lava by their roots is crumbling. They're getting the nourishment directly out of the lava. It's a most amazing tree. And of course it is a tree which is found all the way from Kauai all the way through the islands and the mountains. It's our major forest tree. And it is not a new, it's moving out on the lava flows by wind, and along with a number of other plants that follow it out onto the lava flows. And these lava flows are so fascinating because we know many of them when they were formed, and you can go out there and see how long it's taken. You get small ohia trees just
Hamp, I'm going to have to cut you off. I'm sorry, we've come to that portion where we've run out of time. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Carson for joining us this evening. Next Thursday evening, we'll have Dr. Ken Kaneshiro, an entomologist, a professor of entomology at UH Manoa. He's the director for the Center of Conservation Research and Training and Evolution, and also the director of the Hawaii Evolutionary Biology Program. So thank you for watching Focus on Agriculture, and we'll see you next Thursday evening.